Hello, everybody. So I'm here today with Avery. We actually met back in San Diego, and I'm excited to really dive deep into hormones. You can think of this as kind of like a hormone 101 class, really diving into all things female as well. And I think this is so beneficial for both females and males to learn about. It's something we really don't touch upon that much in school. So to have someone who's more specialized in the field talking about this is going to be amazing. And Avery, if you want to give a little bit of an introduction of yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk with your audience and share information. As Stu just said, I'm Avery. I'm a functional nutritional therapy practitioner and also a restorative wellness practitioner. And I specialize in women's health and hormones and fertility and balancing cycles and kind of preparing the body for conception. And it's such a beautiful process, kind of walking women through that.
Yeah, thank you. So first question, just kind of an overview. So regardless of like specific male or female, but what just in general or are hormones and how do they navigate our life? Why are they important?
So you can think of hormones as like your chemical messengers of your body. So they tell and control activities of organs and cells in your body, kind of conducting is a better word, what specific things should do. So specifically, they kind of influence kind of every aspect of our health. We've got mood and stress and weight and blood sugar levels, and for women, ovulation and fertility, and they kind of just play a part in every single critical thing our body has to do in order to kind of live and be and breathe.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I know a big one that is a common topic that I talk about with people as far as like fasting and diet and nutrition is insulin,
Yeah.
and that
Mhm.
dictates so much. It has such a
Mhm.
control
Mhm.
over, how our energy levels are, how we convert sugar, fat, all of that good stuff. So
Yeah.
diving into that a little bit more, what specifically are the female hormones and then what do they regulate?
So female hormones, there is about one, two, three, four, five, technically six if we're including testosterone. We see that in males. So overarching is something called a gonadotropin releasing hormone. This is a hormone that kind of drives the entire menstrual cycle. So you can think of like ovulation, supporting follicular growth, and then also the corpus luteum, which is something that we see in the luteal phase, supporting progesterone production, kind of like the overarching hormone conductor. And then if we go down a little bit, we've got FSH, which is our follicular stimulating hormone. This is a hormone that stimulates the follicle growth, allowing for the secretion of estrogen as well in our first half of our cycle, kind of preparing for ovulation. Then if we trickle down a little bit, we've got luteinizing hormone, so LH. You'll kind of see that on tests and things like that. That is the hormone that brings in ovulation. It kind of triggers that and then supports the rest of the cycle. So through your luteal phase is where you're going to see a rise in luteinizing hormone. And then we've got estrogen, which most women or men are familiar with. That supports for women the growth development of the female reproductive system, whether that's like through your uterus, breast development, things like that. Also supports thickening of your uterine lining. So that's why it's really important to have enough in the beginning of your cycle to support that. And then breast tissue, again, helps also stimulate luteinizing hormone. So you need estrogen to stimulate luteinizing hormone to support ovulation. Can also be important for body fat production, tissue hydration, also metabolism too. It kind of plays in there. And then progesterone, which I think a lot of women are also familiar with, that's produced in your ovaries and by your adrenal glands. And that's really important in the second half of your cycle. Progesterone's often key in what we kind of know as maintaining and sustaining a healthy pregnancy. You also need that for implantation. So to make sure that if you're trying to get pregnant, you have enough so that you can actually get pregnant. But then also helps with the balance of estrogen. We need both hand in hand. And then libido, that's another one. And then it's really known as our feel-good hormone. So when we have enough, we kind of have that nice, sustained, calm energy production. So yeah, and then testosterone, We see that in men and women, and it kind of does similar effects in women as it does in men. One of the main things is libido, but then also for women, bone formation, strength, muscle development, things like that. And that's often prominent in the first half of your cycle. And then as you move to the second half after ovulation, it kind of goes down. So those are the key ones for female hormones that often touch upon.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And just like a sub question from that. So, just to understand, like for male and female, there's both estrogen and testosterone, but it's just a different balance between for each gender, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And typically, like what would happen if those hormones are out of balance? Like what are some negative effects? Like why should we care to balance our hormones?
I mean, if we kind of think about it overarching, we go back to why they're important, what they do. At the end of the day, supporting your mood, energy levels, overall body function, kind of the way you live your day in and day out, how you function. It's just so important, especially for women, as we kind of come into whether we're in our late 20s, early 30s, thinking about pregnancy, even just wanting to balance your cycle. When we start to pay attention to it and we realize like, oh, I'm feeling off, it could be a hormonal related issue. And when we start to piece those puzzle pieces together, we get to understand how important it is to have balanced hormones to just overall feel better. They do so much. So if we can support that, we'll off to a better direction as far as how we live our life. So
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think one thing, like just, different symptoms or issues that different women are dealing with, or even men, but we haven't really experienced what it's like to have balanced hormones. Maybe that's because we're like following a diet that's not nourishing and fulfilling all of our needs. I know for me, like I was probably not getting the nutrition I needed with a certain diet for a while. So I was struggling with an irregular period, but also, mood, energy, like so many things were out of whack. And when I started to actually focus on the hormonal balance, that was a lot of what came together. I know that one other thing that is very common amongst a lot of females is birth control. And I'm especially passionate about it because when I was younger and started taking it, it's just not something I question at all. If someone told me what it was doing with, our estrogen and progesterone, like our hormones, I would have been like, oh, I don't know. I don't really care. Like, I don't know what this
yeah.
means to me. I wouldn't have questioned it at all. And if they listed out the symptoms, whether it was like blood clots or endometriosis or whatever it is, I would have been like, okay, cool. But, I just don't want to worry about getting pregnant. So I'm just curious, like, what exactly is hormonal birth control doing to our hormones?
So if you understand birth control, learn about it, know about it, it's a synthetic form of hormone. Like it's not actually the hormone that your body naturally produces. It's a synthetic variation. So by taking that birth control, whether that's a pill, a patch, an IUD, other forms, all forms, you're basically shutting off any signal that you would naturally send your brain that your hormones need to connect and support ovulation, right? So it turns it off. So you don't secrete those hormones that are needed for that. So then you don't ovulate, and then that suppresses any chances of getting pregnant if that's the reason you're taking birth control in the first place. But going back to your first question about like maybe why it's prescribed, acne is a really big one. Also, if you come in and you're like, I've have really painful periods, like what do I do? Here's this pill, this will help you. But then also period regulation in general for regular periods, oftentimes birth control is prescribed. But then too, just not wanting for contraceptive purposes, not wanting to get pregnant. But oftentimes it's the first thing that traditional doctors lean on as a remedy for symptoms that are showing up in the body, rather than kind of diving into why those are showing up in the first place.
Yeah, that's so important, especially the last thing you mentioned as far as like diving into why, like the root cause. And I think,
Mhm.
there's so many different avenues of medical, but I know that a lot of doctors actually admit to, just being trained to prescribe birth control, but they're not trained to, go to the root cause. So not necessarily their fault, but just a
Yeah.
different way of training.
Mhm.
So that's why I think it's amazing that there's other people who specialize in maybe like proper regulation or more holistic methods. I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. Let's just say, like, someone does have an irregular period or a painful period, um, or even loss of period. Like, what are some things that, because I'm sure this has to do with like fertility as well. What are some things, just like an overview, that you'd suggest for them to kind of like take a look at or maybe dive into a little bit more?
With every person, I always preface with everyone's bio individual, everyone's different. So just because I'm mentioning something here may not be what you need, but most in general, I kind of start everyone on examining what you're eating. Are you eating whole food? Are you getting enough sleep, hydration, movements, stress level? What does that look like? But then also jumping into how our gut is influenced by hormones and our hormones influence our gut and all these things. And I'm assessing that piece. Are you able to digest your food well? Are you able to go to the bathroom more than once a day? Do you get constipated easily? Like all of these things, and kind of start to assess that. But then also, on top of that, make sure you're eating well, reducing stress. Those are kind of the main areas I focus on, and then lean into, based on what comes up there, lean into specifics, specifically with certain symptoms and what those may mean. But one of the best places to start is whole food nutrition, making sure we're taking out the processed food, the junk, the processed oils, eating well for our body. That serves us beyond anything else. Supports our body in doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I've been diving into so much more. Like, coming from a fitness background, we're taught
Mm-hmm.
like you need to eat protein for muscle, but protein's doing so much more than muscle.
Yeah.
It's literally
Yeah.
helping with brain cognition and skin and our hormones. And same with
Mm-hmm.
like getting the essential fat, which a lot of people are scared to have. But I think after experiencing it myself, I kind of was eating more of a lower fat for so long and realized, like, the second I introduced that more, my for me personally, my body started to thrive and I got, a regular period back. Um, yeah, that's so interesting. Speaking on gut health a little bit more, I never really dove into it a lot beforehand because I, again, like, normalized a lot of things I was feeling. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
normal to have, like, sometimes like bloating or really excessive gas or like some pain here and there. And after, again, like, coming back to diet switching, that I realized that a lot of those things I normalized didn't have to be that way, and I just had to
Mm-hmm.
reassess what was right for me for eating wise.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, if you could dive into a little bit more the connection you mentioned between our gut health and our hormones. Like, how does that play in together?
So in the gut specifically, there's something called estrobolome. And in that, it's kind of like a big piece of hormonal regulation when it comes to gut, how they kind of intertwine. And there's an enzyme within that called beta glucuronidase. And in a normal, healthy gut, what I mean by that is like normal amount of good bacteria and bad bacteria. We've got a mix of both. We want a good balance there. If we are feeding our body with processed food, if we are not sleeping well, if we are stressed out, we have a propensity to an unbalanced, unhealthy microbiome. And so when that happens, that estrobolome, the beta glucuronidase, should be at a nice, even level. And when we have all those things I just mentioned, kind of not doing what we're supposed to do, that beta glucuronidase level can raise. And what happens when it raises is that it's kind of what is the good term for it? A kind of magnet to estrogen. So instead of in a healthy gut, kind of allowing estrogen to move through appropriately, be excreted in the body, it'll hold on to it and recirculate it through your system. So you're more prone to not only maybe getting more digestive issues down the road, but estrogen dominance. That's a big one. So the link between gut health and hormones is a big estrogen piece. So if you can kind of keep your gut health in check, support your gut as best you can, you have a better chance of supporting estrogen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of times like we hop to like a lot of different symptoms and try to just put like a
Mhm.
band-aid, but I think
Mhm.
this is probably why they call like our gut our second brain, because it
Yeah.
is like
Mhm.
controlling so much, and then of course like
Mhm.
navigating our hormones.
Yep.
So with that, I'd love to dive into, nutrition. This is something that I love to nerd out about. Um, I think we kind of mentioned like eating whole food based is such a key. That's always
Mhm.
like one thing I tell people, regardless of what diet or like what you're eating or not eating. If
Mhm.
you can eat whole food based, that can be really good. But do you have some suggestions on foods that like in too much excess may not be the best, or some that are maybe like really good to incorporate for people?
So again, coming back to that bio individuality piece, I don't want to say that something's too much or too little for someone. Kind of just depends on that person. But specifically, we can look at the luteal phase. That's often where we see PMS symptoms, right? So acne, breakouts, mood swings, irritability, anxiety.
Mm,
There's a couple key foods, and Elisa Vitti, if you're familiar with her, she's got something called cycle syncing,
okay.
and it's basically eating and movement for your cycle, kind of supporting the
Mm,
natural flow production of hormones through food and lifestyle. And some of the foods that she recommends, which I love for supporting PMS and your luteal phase, is things like sweet potatoes and dark leafy greens and coconut yogurt, chickpeas, and bone broth. Those are like the top 5 that she recommends. And that supports not only the healthy production of progesterone, but we can also see a increase for a lot of women of estrogen in our luteal phase when we really shouldn't see it there. We should have
mm,
nice, healthy increase of estrogen during the first half of our cycle, because again, that supports ovulation. But we don't really want to see it at the second half because that's not what we're trying to do. We need progesterone. So these foods help kind of support that overall all balance. And specifically with dark leafy greens, that supports your liver. So allowing for your liver to kind of take out any excess estrogen, um, circulate it correctly through your system, is really key. So that's often like if women come to me and they're like, hey, I've got these issues. What can I do food wise? I always start typically in the luteal phase because that's easiest. I think a lot of women have got cramps, mood swings, headaches, digestive issues. What can we do there? And then we can move through the other phases and support food wise there. But those are some key ones I think that a lot of women do really well with, in kind of calming those symptoms down and just helping you feel better overall, which is key during that phase. We don't need to feel like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? I'm feel outside my body, so to speak. You don't need to feel that way. So
yeah, that's really good information and advice. I definitely feel that like different symptoms like that
yeah.
before, and I know a lot of people get like cravings or need different food while they're on their period. For me, for
Mhm.
some reason, I almost like have like very less of an appetite during, but before during that phase you were talking about, that's really when I tend to like eat more and
Yeah.
want,
Yeah.
even more carbs, or,
Mhm. Mhm.
different things like that. So I totally feel that. Um, so I'm curious. I know that, period regulation is huge, and I think regardless if someone is wanting a baby or not, just as a woman and like wanting to be in sync with your cycle and feel good
Mhm.
about that and feel safe and have that awareness, that's really important. And I know we mentioned, about diet, but what are some things that could maybe be something for people to look at if they are experiencing irregular period? I know you mentioned like what are, what are the negative effects if hormones are out of balance. I know for me it was like stress, and at one point even like overtraining, like physical training that got in the way. But what are things to consider, and like what advice would you give for someone who does have like an out of whack period?
I mean, one of the best things you can do is understand your own body. So come back to yourself. What is your body doing? So tracking your cycle. How long is your cycle? Typically, we want to see it anywhere between 28 days and 32 days. So cycle length being like first day you start your period to the day before you start your next period. So roughly between 28, 32 days. And then is it regular? Do you get it every month? Do you get it twice a month? Do you get it every 2 to 3 months? How many days is it? How many days are you bleeding? What's your flow like? Is it really heavy? Is it light? Is it in the middle? Are you spotting? Like, make note of that. PMS symptoms. Do you have any of those symptoms that kind of carry in through your period? Cramping, headaches, mood swings. And then overall, what's your mood look like for the entire month? Typically, beginning of your first half of your cycle. So I didn't mention this before, but days 1 through about 14, 16-ish, first half, right through ending your period to ovulation. You should generally be like peppy, happy, got a lot of energy, ready to go. Where the second half, after ovulation through menstruation, we can see our mood kind of dip. Just want to be a little bit more calm. Again, that progesterone piece coming back into play. And then also symptom for skin wise, we can see acne more kind of developing at the end towards menstruation. So looking at those pieces, kind of tracking for yourself, what does that look like for you? And, not comparing it to somebody else, but making note, especially I would do like at least 3 months. It takes about 3 months for our periods to kind of regulate themselves. So for fully supporting them. So if you can kind of keep track of what's going on, what it looks like, and then from there assess out, okay, should I start with movement? Should I look at diet? Should I look at stress? Should I support my sleep? Kind of hydration, things like that. And that can be really helpful. And then also, if you're not wanting to be on birth control, that fertility awareness method is great. So what that is kind of tracking your cervical mucus, basal body temperature, heart rate to see the fluctuations of hormones and tracking ovulation. We'll see spikes in body temperature, resting heart rate. We'll see more cervical mucus around ovulation. So that's also something you can track as well, which is really helpful for your understanding of your own body, for your husband or your partner or whomever to help understand too. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The kind of like getting in tune with myself I've been off birth control for almost 3 years now, but
Mhm.
just getting in sync with my cycle. So that's been something that's huge. And I think like the tracking is great. It's okay if you don't, but do you happen to know any like apps or things that can help if someone didn't want to just rely on journaling for tracking their period?
Yeah, I really like the My Flow app, MY
Okay.
and FLO app. There's also things like Daisy, Ava. Those are the basal body temperature apps that are really supportive. If you're wanting to kind of go at it through like, I don't want to get pregnant, those are great. But I would say too, I don't want you to rely on an app to
Yes.
see if you ovulated because it doesn't know your body, it doesn't know you. So look at yourself. What are you experiencing? What's your body doing? And that's a better, uh, I guess, determination of what's happening. But you can also keep track of it in the app. I think that's really helpful. Just to have it on paper, you can kind of see it. So yeah, I like that one. I
Yeah.
like those the best.
Yeah, that flow is the one that I tried out, and I agree with you as far as, just moving in the direction where, like,
Mhm.
we're able to empower ourselves,
Yeah,
no matter what kind of relationship we're in,
yeah,
being able to feel like, we're not relying on an app or something, like, external that's
mhm,
navigating our hormones, and we're
mhm,
really able to, like, feel that within ourselves. I always talk about, like, our connection with nature, but I think just getting connected with our, like, a big reason they call it our moon cycle, but like getting connected
yeah,
that way, I think is super huge.
mhm.
So yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate all of that information. Anything else you'd like to share, and then also where people can find you?
I guess I would just say, like, closing out, that if you're kind of in that journey, that space of not really knowing what to do, kind of wanting to kind of support your hormones, where to start, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm over at Avery Gary Wellness on Instagram, which Chucha will probably link to. But yeah, it's always a journey, right? It's never like one and done. It's a process, and be open to that process. And it may not be what you expect it to be, but it'll be what's meant for you at the end. So yeah,
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yes,
you're
and
welcome.
I'll link Avery below. Thank you so much
You're
again. That
welcome.
was so great. I definitely didn't know all about that with hormones and just how our body works. So I'll definitely be rewatching and taking notes. Thank you to everyone who joined in and is watching, and have a beautiful day.